I want to show you the inner workings of politics. I can take you to America, and believe me, what I am about to tell you has happened in most parts of the world in the past, is happening now, and will happen in the future. By the end of the 1970s, the shadow of scandals that shook the American political scene was looming large. During this period, rumors circulated in the corridors of power that some politicians had established relationships with the organized crime world. Consequently, people's trust in politicians had declined. But unwittingly, this trust would be shaken even further. It was at this time that the FBI had prepared a groundbreaking plan to re-establish public order and root out corrupt politics. When agents specializing in tracking down the criminal underworld launched the covert operation, codenamed ABSCAM, in 1978, their actual goal was to uncover illegal art smuggling and organized crime activities. But even they probably didn't anticipate the operation growing this big. When the operation began, initial intelligence indicated that certain individuals with mafia connections in New York were planning major heists involving stolen artworks and counterfeit bonds. The FBI rolled up its sleeves to follow these leads, aiming to expose not only the criminal networks, but also the white-collar individuals doing business with them. But their methods would be unusually cinematic. Acting on the principle that small bait must be sacrificed to catch the big fish, the FBI leadership decided to include a figure from within the criminal world in the plan. Melvin Weinberg, a master con artist who had been convicted of fraud and was in prison at the time, was offered cooperation by the FBI and brought on to the operation team. Melvin was actually quite the wild card. He was a criminal, but he had no record of violent crimes. He had been arrested for financial fraud, such as fake investment funds, scams, and Ponzi schemes. But because the amounts involved were substantial, and he was a hardened criminal, his sentence was quite severe. That is, until it was decided that he was the right type for the operation. Weinberg's motivation was both to regain his freedom and to secure a hefty reward. The FBI had promised him a reduced sentence and payment at the end of the operation. Thus, an interesting collaboration was established between the criminal world and law enforcement. FBI agents got to work by setting up a fictitious company called Melvin Abdul Enterprises. The supposed owner of this company was Kambir Abdurrahman, a wealthy sheikh from the Middle East who was looking for investment opportunities in America. Whether the investments were legal or not was irrelevant. The supposed sheikh had a lot of money and was ready to distribute more money to add to it. That's how it would be presented. That's where the name of the operation, ABSCAM, came from. Abdul and the English word scam, meaning fraud, were combined to form a code name meaning Abdul's scam. In short, the fake thing was actually a pawn put on stage by the FBI to catch sellers of fake paintings, artworks, stocks, bonds, and other valuables. However, this plot would quickly and unexpectedly evolve into something else. In 1978, the FBI used creative tactics that went beyond standard methods in the ABSCAM operation. As you can understand, the first step was to turn Melvin Weinberg's experience in fraud to their advantage. Abdul Enterprises Limited was established. In fact, $1 million had been allocated for the operation, and the hunt was on. Under FBI supervision, Melvin became the U.S. representative of the fake company called Abdul Enterprises. Thus, Weinberg and FBI agents, dressed in luxury clothing, introduced themselves as representatives of an Arab investor named Abdul and tried to gain the confidence of the fraudsters. This deception was so skillful that many people believed those they were meeting were the men of the real wealthy sheikh. FBI agents always took care to create an air of glamour at their meetings. They acted like representatives of a truly wealthy businessman, not hesitating to use the funds allocated to them. For example, a luxury hotel suite near John F. Kennedy Airport in New York and some luxury offices in Washington and Philadelphia were rented for secret meetings. These venues were equipped with hidden cameras behind the walls, and everything was recorded second by second. Abdul's representatives began meeting with figures from New York's underworld and, pretending not to know any better, started bargaining for stolen or fake works of art. Informant Melvin spread the word through his contacts in the world of fraud that the sheikh was looking for more works of art, and the teams lay in wait. During the meeting, million-dollar deals were being made, and figures from the criminal underworld were producing new works one after another without knowing who they were dealing with. The FBI was meeting with these figures and recording the events, but to keep the matter under wraps, they weren't touching anyone or bringing anyone in yet. In a short time, the thieves and mafia brokers continued to show interest in this fake customer. Then the FBI pressed the button and managed to seize millions of dollars worth of stolen paintings within a few months by pretending to buy them. This first success brought new confidence and new ideas to the operation. Then the same tactic was applied in the backstreets of Wall Street. This time, the fake sheikh's money was made to look like it was going towards fake stocks and bonds. The outcome was again in the FBI's favor. The release of approximately $600 million worth of fake worthless paper was prevented thanks to this. But what became apparent during the operation was a very different situation that no one had anticipated. The agents claimed that, according to their fabricated scenario, the fictitious Saudi investor was seeking various business opportunities in the US, but was willing to work with the right people to overcome bureaucratic obstacles. Understand the truth here. Some of the fraudsters also offered to present their political connections to the sheikh's representatives, i.e., the agents, saying things like, "We have a few political acquaintances. We'll sort it out with them. Don't worry." It was after these stages that the FBI began to realize that the case would not end with just a few underground schemes. Why and how did a fraudster have political connections? One of the individuals the FBI interviewed about the fake promissory note had presented the representatives with a brilliant idea. Since this Arab investor was willing to spend so much money, why not open a casino in Atlantic City? By the end of the 1970s, Atlantic City was becoming famous for its new casinos, and the necessary licenses for these businesses, i.e. casino permits, were worth their weight in gold. It had become essential to access the connections of those crooks with political ties. In other words, this casino proposal that reached the ears of FBI agents had given the operation a new direction. Melvin was ironically known in the criminal underworld as a reliable con artist, so he began spreading the word among his circle that a company called Abdul Enterprises wanted to enter the gambling industry in Atlantic City. This dissemination was actually aimed more at politicians who did business with those types in that world than at the criminal underworld itself. After all, he was one of the trusted and well-known con artists in that community. Naturally, no one knew he had turned into an informant, but when the news spread quickly, the fish the FBI was waiting for soon took the bait. Angelo Arricchetti, mayor of Camden and an influential figure in the New Jersey State Senate, couldn't ignore what he heard about this wealthy sheikh. He even went so far as to send word directly to the sheikh's representatives, saying, "I can arrange the license you need. I can hand Atlantic City over to you," putting on a show with his eyes clouded by greed. Arricchetti, who mistook these so-called investors for the real deal, planned to take his cut while arranging bribes for other agencies required for the license. Arricchetti was a rare find among FBI agents, one who could open the doors to the rotten underbelly of American politics. He was a powerful politician known for his connections as a deal-maker, so if he was attempting this, who knows what those around him were doing. Thus, the second act of the operation was now unfolding. The goal was to immortalize the moments when powerful politicians accepted bribes on camera and catch them red-handed. And when that day came, they succeeded. The supposedly honest politician, after taking the bribe, had told them he would gladly grant them the license. Of course, all this was being recorded moment by the so-called sheikh's so-called representatives, unbeknownst to him. It was time to test the bigger fish in Washington. The promise of Atlantic City casino bribes had opened Pandora's box. With the cooperation of Angelo Arricchetti, the FBI had ensnared a series of federal and local politicians one by one. While Arricchetti was the first name to be recorded as having been caught, unfortunately he was not alone. On the contrary, he had served as a bridge to lure others into the same trap. Among the politicians who believed the FBI's fictional Arab investor and accepted the illegal offer were a U.S. senator, a member of the House of Representatives, and a local administrator. Each of these individuals held important positions in American politics and were people elected by the public, who received hefty salaries. Some were experienced congressional members with 30 years of experience. Others were young politicians full of ambition. But what they all had in common was that they had succumbed to the lure of the money offered without much resistance. Following the lead of Eric Cady, who had initially accepted the bribe, Harrison Williams, the influential senator from New Jersey, was the second politician to fall into this trap. Actually, he was cautious at first, but this caution wasn't about whether or not to take money he wasn't entitled to. It was about the fear of getting caught. But instead of offering him cash directly, the FBI had taken a more subtle approach. The senator had been offered an 18% stake in a titanium mining project that the sheik would be a partner in. In return, Williams would ensure that the state contract for this project was awarded to the sheik and would help him obtain a residence permit in the U.S. All this was child's play for the senator, and he had already accepted the offer, dollar signs burning in his eyes. But of course, he had no idea that all these conversations were being recorded. By 1980, Williams would become one of the rare senators in U.S. history to be convicted of a crime while in office. However, among the other names caught up in the operation, members of the House of Representatives, i.e. congressmen, stood out. Because not just one or two, but nearly 10 members of Congress accepted this bribe offer and pocketed $500,000 each without batting an eye. Over a period of 2 to 3 years, all members of Congress tested in different states were recorded. In fact, the words uttered by Democrat Michael Ozzie Myers, who represented the Philadelphia area, as he pocketed the bribe money, something like, "If you have the money, you're the king," were etched into people's memories. This brazen statement laid bare how easily power in the political arena could be squandered in the wrong hands. Another congressman, John Jenrette, upon hearing the offer, responded with a sickeningly complacent attitude. "There's thievery in my blood. I'd accept it in a minute." Thus, he once again displayed his sickeningly complacent attitude. In short, everyone was on the same page. No one was upset or anything. On the contrary, as you heard and saw, the shamelessness was at its peak. Each and every one of them was on record. But the most foolish yet clever defense came from Florida Representative Richard Kelly. He was caught on camera taking the money at the bribery meeting, then tried to wriggle out of the situation by claiming that he hadn't fallen into the FBI's trap, but rather had staged the whole thing to investigate the suspicious characters around him. In other words, it was a series of absurdities designed to make it look like he had taken the money so he could get the others arrested for bribery. But of course, he wasn't dealing with a 5-year-old child. Names from all areas of the bureaucracy were present, from senators to mayors, from jury members to immigration office officials. As a result, a total of 19 people were charged and brought to court as part of the ABSCAM investigation. During the trial, these politicians did not hesitate to put forward various defenses, however absurd, to save themselves. Their common excuse or argument was that the FBI had set a trap for them. Their lawyers argued that their clients would not normally commit such a crime, but that FBI agents had essentially baiting them and inciting them to commit the crime. Even the senator who accepted the bribe claims he was the victim of a conspiracy because he did not support the other candidate in the U.S. presidential race at the time. He also claimed that he had not technically accepted a bribe because the promised shares were now worthless. If you will, all the politicians were scrambling to wriggle out of this situation. However, the obvious truth was that the exchange of money had taken place in front of cameras. These individuals, who had fallen into the FBI's trap, became the protagonists of an unprecedented corruption operation in American history. When the details of the ABSCAM operation leaked to the public in February 1980, it naturally caused a shockwave across the country. The headlines of the incident, in which 19 people were arrested, reported that a bribery ring had been uncovered. The public was experiencing anger and shame at seeing that their elected representatives could be bought so easily. Because there was undeniable evidence of an operation that could not be denied or concealed. While some idiots tried to debate whether it was ethical to set up hidden cameras and traps or to encourage politicians, the men were blatantly eating up the people's money. However, the legal process would be at least as tough as the operation itself. Everyone mentioned in the investigation was brought to court separately. The trials lasted from 1980 to 1981. Members of the legislature within the judiciary were being tried by the very systems they were part of. In other words, the friend you had coffee with last week, or your junior colleague, was now standing before you. Indeed, and unfortunately, the court overturned the sentences of some of these criminals with powerful connections, claiming that the FBI had set a trap and annulled their convictions. The public, journalists, FBI agents, and even us could have been involved. But in the end, everyone was shocked by this decision not to detain them. Okay, these were all powerful people, but the outcome and the records were there for all to see. Thus, even if the jury found these men guilty in cases heard in different cities, the judges would reject the verdict and rule that they should remain free. The issue was the same. You could say the FBI had set a trap for those brazen men taking bribes in front of the cameras. But fortunately, as is the case everywhere, it was possible to find honest people there too, and the Department of Justice quickly appealed the lower court's acquittal decisions. In other words, it had requested that these decisions be reviewed. Naturally, when the matter went from the congressmen in the spotlight to the higher authorities, the federal appeals courts overturned the lower court decisions, stating that the FBI's methods were within legal limits and reinstated the defendants' convictions. Thus, all convictions were now final, and thankfully, the arrested politicians were sent to prison. As a result, even though the elected officials involved in the bribery scandal saw the end of their political careers, their prison sentences were generally up to 3 years, and unfortunately, most would be released on good behavior within a year or two. But one way or another, justice had been served, adequately or not, for some. The ABSCAM operation was conducted with unprecedented efficiency and was successful. I would love to see your thoughts in the comments, but believe me, no party will care about what you defend, fight for, or curse about in those comments. So please don't tire yourself out and stress yourself unnecessarily. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time. As always, stay well.